something critical just broke open in the investigation into what happened to Nancy Guthrie. Subscribe right now, because in this video, we are going to answer the question that has been burning at the center of this case since the moment it began. Why her? Why that house? Why that family? FBI profilers have spent weeks dissecting every detail of this case, and today those answers are finally on the table. Nancy Guthrie is still missing, an 84-year-old great-grandmother, a woman whose body required daily medication simply to function, a woman whose heart depended on a pacemaker just to keep beating, a woman who walked with great difficulty, and yet someone chose her, deliberately, intentionally, with full awareness of exactly who she was and exactly what taking her would mean. The question law enforcement has been trying to answer since the early hours of February 1st is the question that unlocks this entire case. Why would anyone target this particular woman? What did they want from her? And what does that choice tell us about the psychology of whoever is responsible? Start with the question that former FBI agent Jim Fitzgerald raised in front of a national audience during his appearance on Megyn Kelly's program. He didn't dance around it. He asked it plainly, directly, without softening the edge. Why was Nancy Guthrie taken from her home at approximately 2 o'clock in the morning? Sit with that for a moment. Not midday, not early evening, not during a routine errand or a doctor's appointment. 2 in the morning, the precise hour when a residential street falls completely silent, when every porch light has gone dark, when every neighbor is deep asleep, when the only people moving through the world are the ones who chose that hour on purpose. Fitzgerald also made a point about the $1 million reward that has been sitting on the table with no takers. He said the silence itself is information. $1 million and still nothing. He said the person responsible didn't go to that house for valuables. They didn't go for cash or jewelry or anything that could be fenced. Fitzgerald said the evidence points to one conclusion. Whoever did this wanted Nancy Guthrie specifically, not what she owned. And here is where the profiler analysis fractures into two completely separate directions. Two theories, two criminal profiles, two entirely different pictures of who did this and why. Mary Ellen O'Toole, former senior FBI profiler, former director of the Bureau's Behavioral Analysis Unit, and now a forensic science professor at George Mason University, laid out the central tension of this investigation with surgical precision. She said the question investigators must hold open simultaneously is this: was Nancy Guthrie selected because she is Savannah Guthrie's mother? Or was she selected because she was an 84-year-old woman, medically fragile, living alone, with no partner to intervene? Those are two radically different offenders, two radically different motivation structures, two radically different psychological blueprints. And O'Toole was unequivocal. Both possibilities must remain active. This is the defining fork in the road of this investigation. Which path leads to the truth changes everything about how this case gets solved. Follow the first path. Nancy was chosen because of her famous daughter, former FBI agent and former CIA officer Tracy Walder went on record with this theory and didn't hedge. She said she does not believe for a single moment this was an opportunistic incident that escalated unexpectedly. She pointed directly to how this was carried out, the precision, the timing, the targeting. She said the evidence suggests someone who was either consumed by rage at something Savannah Guthrie had done or said publicly, or someone who had developed a deep, fixating obsession with Savannah herself. And she said, whoever that person is, they chose to act against this family. Walder acknowledged she had sat with this theory privately before going public because she never wants Savannah to feel any weight of responsibility. None of this is her fault, but Walder said the evidence pulls hard in one direction. If you want to devastate a woman who is surrounded by security on a national television set, who is visible but untouchable, you don't go after her directly. You go after the person she would do anything to protect. You go after the person at the absolute center of her world, her mother. Former FBI Special Agent Greg Rogers added reinforcement to this line of thinking from a different angle. He publicly rejected what some commentators have labeled the opportunistic encounter theory. He said the details of what happened on February 1st are simply incompatible with an unplanned incident, and then he drew a distinction that most people outside law enforcement don't naturally make, but that every investigator understands immediately. An opportunistic incident is about circumstance. A deliberate, targeted taking is about intent. It requires advanced planning. It requires information gathering. It requires someone to have studied the target before ever setting foot near that property. And Rogers said it sometimes requires familiarity, not the kind you get from driving through a neighborhood once, the kind you get from watching over time. Nancy Guthrie's daily patterns, her medication schedule, the exact window of time when she would be most isolated, when the street would be quietest, when no one would see. This person didn't stumble onto this. They prepared. Now here is the detail that Mary Ellen O'Toole surfaced, and this is the part I need you to genuinely focus on. She reviewed the doorbell camera footage from that night, and she said the element that stood out most sharply to her was not what the suspect did, it was how he carried himself while doing it. She said the first thing she assesses when examining footage like this is whether the offender displays the level of visible anxiety the situation would demand of almost any human being. And then she said something that reframes the entire footage. With this suspect, that expected anxiety is largely absent, not in how he moves, not in how he positions himself, not in the deliberate, unhurried way he spends time on that porch. She said, if either of us made the decision to do something like this, we would be barely functional with nerves. He wasn't, and she said that points to one of two explanations. Either he has done something similar before, and the fear response has been blunted by prior experience, or he has rehearsed this scenario so completely inside his own mind, run it forward and backward so many times, lived inside it so thoroughly in the dark corners of his imagination, that by the time the physical reality arrived, it felt almost familiar. The fantasy had already become his reality. What happened that night was simply the moment it stopped being imaginary. Now take the second path. Nancy was not targeted because of Savannah. She was targeted because of who she herself was. 84 years old, dependent on a pacemaker, required daily medication, limited physical mobility, living alone in a quiet residential neighborhood. Consider what that profile communicates to a predator-minded individual. It signals minimal physical resistance. It signals medical vulnerability that creates urgency and leverage. It signals a person who cannot run, who cannot physically overpower anyone, who has no partner present to raise an alarm, and who exists in a home on a quiet street without visible deterrence. Former FBI profiler Jim Clemente addressed how an offender operating from this motivation might have gathered that specific information in the first place. He outlined the possibilities: methodically, repair technicians, plumbers, electricians, roofers, pool service workers, landscapers, package delivery drivers, rideshare drivers who had picked her up or dropped her off even once. Any service professional who had ever had a reason to be on that property, even briefly, even years prior, would have had the exposure necessary to assess what Nancy Guthrie's day-to-day life actually looked like. And if the person doing that assessing already had a fixation, what they saw was not just an elderly woman. They saw an opening. Here is where both theories stop being separate and start bleeding into each other. Former FBI profiler Greg McCrary, one of the architects of modern behavioral profiling, described a psychological type that doesn't cleanly fit either category, but actually inhabits both. He talked about someone who had been circling this neighborhood, watching, returning, but who had also potentially developed a specific celebrity fixation, someone who discovered through proximity or circumstance that the woman at this particular address was Savannah Guthrie's mother, and who then began constructing, in their own mind, a plan that wove both women into a single terrible narrative. McCrary said, it is entirely plausible, both motivations existing simultaneously inside one person, someone who noticed Nancy's vulnerability and who also became preoccupied with her famous daughter. And McCrary was direct about what investigators and the public should be watching for. If someone fits the physical description from that footage, if that person showed signs of fixation on this family before February 1st, and if that person's normal life patterns have shifted significantly since, those factors compounding on each other are exactly the kind of lead that needs to be called in immediately. And then there is the Zodiac comparison, and it is not a casual one. Mary Ellen O'Toole raised it in an interview, and most people move past it too quickly. She said this suspect almost certainly has a preoccupation with every piece of media coverage generated by this case. And then she named the Zodiac directly, the offender who sent taunting correspondence to newspapers, who surfaced publicly to insert himself into the story his own actions had created, who needed the world to know he was the one responsible. Otuel said she keeps that framework in mind when she looks at this case and consider the choices this suspect made. He didn't stay invisible. He went to a media outlet with a ransom note. He chose TMZ. He made demands that he knew would be broadcast publicly. He wasn't just after Nancy Guthrie. He wanted a stage. He wanted to watch Savannah Guthrie on national television, her composure cracking. He wanted the story on every screen, every feed, every front page. He wanted to feel, perhaps for the first time in his life, like he was the most significant person in the room. And right now, with near certainty, he is watching everything that is being said about this case, every update, every report, every video, including this one. Now the backpack, the 25-liter Ozark Trail backpack, visible on the suspect in the doorbell footage. This matters more than it might appear. When the backpack was initially identified, investigators noted it was sold exclusively through Walmart, but then Sheriff Nanos introduced a complication that law enforcement is still working through. He noted that a Walmart-exclusive item can surface on secondary markets, eBay, Facebook Marketplace, local garage sales, which means the clean, direct purchase trail investigators had hoped for may instead lead somewhere far more opaque. Second-hand, paid in cash, transacted between strangers, no digital record, no loyalty account, no surveillance footage from a checkout lane. Whether this suspect deliberately chose that path of acquisition, or whether they obtained the backpack casually and simply benefited from the anonymity, the result is the same. The trail goes murky. Investigators are still working it, and they are still looking. Here is the forensic detail the profilers believe may ultimately be the thing that breaks this case wide open. The suspect did not fully cover his mouth. Jim Clemente flagged this the moment the doorbell footage became public. He noted the ski mask, the gloves, the deliberate choice of close-fitting dark clothing, a level of forensic awareness that signals planning, and then the mouth, partially exposed, which means breath, saliva, biological material, DNA, and not DNA that necessarily requires a CODIS database match to be useful. Clemente pointed directly to genetic genealogy, the same methodology that identified the Golden State suspect 4 decades after his offenses. Investigators take a partial DNA profile, run it against publicly available genealogy platforms, locate distant biological relatives, cousins, second cousins, aunts, and then methodically work backward and forward through family trees until a single individual emerges. The glove, recovered approximately 2 miles from the scene, tested positive for unknown male DNA. No CODIS match, but CODIS and genetic genealogy are not the same database, and the genetic genealogy process, slower, more painstaking, but extraordinarily powerful, may already be underway right now. There is also the matter of a possible tattoo, visible in the doorbell footage during moments when the suspect's clothing shifted position on the porch. Profiler Jim Clemente has indicated that what appears in certain frames may be a tattoo on the suspect's body, and tattoos are not anonymous. They carry information. Regional-style conventions, prison-specific iconography, gang-affiliated symbols, custom artwork traceable to specific tattoo artists working in specific cities during specific time periods. Investigators are going through that footage frame by frame, and if the design, placement, or style of that marking can be identified, it compresses the field of possible individuals from a vast population down to something investigators can actually work with. Before we get to the final piece, if you haven't subscribed yet, right now is the moment, because the next video we are releasing is going to go deep into the full behavioral profile of this suspect, the specific pre-offense warning signs that people in his life almost certainly observed, the post-offense behavioral shifts that Jim Clemente described, the things someone close to this person has likely already noticed and may not have recognized for what they are. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell. We are posting again very soon. Back to where we started. Why Nancy? After weeks of analysis from some of the most accomplished investigative minds in this country, here is what the evidence actually supports. She was not a random selection. She was studied. She was observed. Her routines, her physical limitations, her daily patterns, her isolation. Someone knew she lived in that house alone. Someone knew about the pacemaker. Someone knew about the medication. Someone knew about the hours she kept. And someone, driven by obsession with her famous daughter, by predatory calculation targeting her vulnerability, or by some combination of both, made a series of deliberate decisions that Nancy Guthrie was the target, that her home on that quiet street was the location, that 2 a.m. on February 1st was the moment, and that whatever they wanted, power, revenge, money, significance, or something that has no clean name, she was how they intended to get it. She is still out there, and someone watching this right now knows something. The total reward, in this case, has reached $1.2 million. If you have any information at all, call 1-800-CL-FBI or reach the Pima County Sheriff's Department directly at 520-351-4900. Someone in this person's life has noticed a change, a different routine, a strange obsession that suddenly made sense after February 1st, a disappearance from their normal patterns. $1.2 million is waiting for the person with the courage to make that call. And Nancy Guthrie's family is waiting for something even more important. Bring her home.